the second night that we're running this, and yesterday it went pretty well, but I have to say that something has changed between when I gave this presentation yesterday and today. And the thing that has changed is that last night I watched The Birds, and it is a very powerful film. And I'm feeling a little bit shaken, so I'm going to try to get through this. And I have to remind you to buckle your seatbelts when the show begins. And so I just want to say, to begin by commenting on this particular series. I've been living in Amherst. This is my 12th year here with my family, and we really love this cinema. And this is a very intriguing series that the director had put together, Science on Screen. And there's a couple things to say about it. This is from the website, and basically this is advertised as an unexpected pairing of science and filmmaking. And I think that's a good way to phrase it, because we would often think of, or in general, we think about science and filmmaking as being different endeavors. Filmmaking leads to entertainment, as shown here, and science is supposed to lead to enlightenment. And what the series is here is to remind you that actually the border between those two is rather fuzzy, that good cinema will actually be enlightening. And in fact, this is something that I argue in my work, is that science should also be entertaining, and not just because it's silly, but because when it leads down pathways that make us think in ways that help us know about ourselves. Now, if you think about how science, a little more about how science and filmmaking are similar, they both are really pursuits of trying to understand the human condition. And one is an artistic endeavor, one is a different kind of endeavor, but basically it's done well by people that have similar personalities, by people that have a vision, and that they seek that vision, and they seek an end to that vision, be it film or to be the pursuit of a study, with a similar relentlessness. Now, if I can have the next slide, I want to think a little bit about Hitchcock and The Birds, because when you see this film, and when you think about it, it's hard not to, well, you get caught up in the plot and the excitement of what's happening on screen, but it's hard not to then reflect upon how amazing the accomplishment was that Hitchcock produced, given the time and given actually the lack of technology. He pulls off some of the most incredible special effects without actually having that technology available. And he was apparently relentless in the pursuit of getting this done, of reaching a final endpoint. He was an operational master. You might have heard that there's a final scene that he wanted to film that he couldn't quite film, which would be the Golden Gate Bridge covered by birds. And that apparently didn't happen, but he was probably pretty close to getting there. This is a place where I think there's a lot of overlap with science. That good science is done by people who essentially make the best of a difficult situation, that they work with what they have, and they don't get down on themselves, and they don't sit and say, well, I'm not going to be able to reach the end point that I need. And so I want to show you another slide that I know there's at least one person here from a class I teach at UMass in animal behavior. And this is a slide about a famous geneticist, a person who essentially invented the modern field of genetics, Thomas Hunt Morgan. And he's the person who introduced the fruit fly to the world as a study model for genetics. Now, he won the Nobel Prize, and if you didn't know anything about this person, or if you just read a high school textbook, you might say, oh, here's a person who was just a brilliant scientist and had these great ideas, and it all came to him and he won the Nobel Prize. But in fact, when you read about Morgan, you discover that he was kind of like Hitchcock, a real operational master, that he wanted to achieve certain ends, and he was relentless in the pursuit of that, and very creative, and came up with novel solutions. He was really interested in understanding heredity. And I guess we might hear more about this in the preview for The Fly at the next screening. But Morgan, he wanted to know about how animals inherit traits from one another. Why is it that we look like our parents and sometimes act like our parents? And why are dog breeds constant as across generations? Why is that? How are the traits maintained? This is something that befuddled Darwin. We didn't really know much about it at the time. He wanted to study this in the field. He wanted to go to places like Africa and to study big animals in nature. But unfortunately, he was broke. And he was hired at Columbia University, right, in Manhattan. They had essentially no space to do any work. He had a tiny, almost like a little closet for a laboratory. And so he had bananas hanging up in his lab, because everyone liked to eat the bananas, and he discovered that, hey, there are these flies hanging around. Why not work with these? Well, I've got no money to keep them. So he sent his students out onto the streets of Harlem to steal milk bottles from the stoops of people who had left their milk bottles out in order to keep the flies and raise the flies. He was a cheapskate. He didn't like to have his picture taken. This picture was taken surreptitiously by a student who planted a camera. So basically, in the end, he managed to generate mutants of these flies, not Jeff Goldblum, just flies with white eyes, or if you've taken a biology major, you've heard about them. And just through great inferences and dedication, would do crosses between different lines, and eventually, just through inference, with no technology whatsoever, set the basis for modern genetics. So people making do of a difficult situation. That's a real nice commonality between good science and good filmmaking. Now, this is actually a segue into the film and birds, because it's the same theme that I want to develop in the brief time that I'm going to be talking. I know that I stand between you and the movie, so that's not a good position to be in, and I promise not to go on past 8 o'clock. So bear with me. The argument that I'm going to develop that we've been pursuing in our research on birds is that birds also make the best of a difficult situation, that they are masters of operation. They're sort of like Hitchcock or Morgan at a scale that's smaller and more diverse. And this is a theme in evolutionary biology. We see that in evolution, creatures, plants and animals, don't evolve to be perfect. They rather evolve to make the best of the situation that they've got, that they face in their particular ecology and environmental circumstances. So this is a picture of a Darwin's finch, and it's feeding on a seed, and it seems to have the best of all worlds if you just look at it at the surface. So it's feeding on this really hard seed. It's called a scutia berry, and this is a scutia plant, and it's probably the only species of bird that can eat this particular fruit efficiently. Why? Because it's got this nice big beak. This is a ground finch. It's got a nice large beak, and with this large beak, it can crack open that seed. If I gave you that seed, you'd be hard pressed to find a way to eat that. You could break your teeth. You'd have to have some sort of pliers to crack that open. So, in fact, birds show an incredible diversity of beak types, and you will, I dare say, see some of that diversity in the film, with the beaks not actually feeding on seeds, but carrying out more nefarious tasks. And so you might say, birds actually got it pretty good. They live in environments where they have this tool that can crack open seeds. Next slide. Another thing that might make you say that birds got it easy is the fact that they got these wings on their bodies. And with wings, you could fly around. And that's a really nice way to move around. It can help you escape predators. It can help you find places, new locations that have food that you might be interested in. So it sounds pretty good. But there's a rub. With specialization for flight and specializations of the beak for feeding, which come about through evolution, there are also trade-offs. These animals face circumstances that are not always easy. The first one being, where do these wings come from? Well, if you were to design a creature with wings, let's say like an angel, you would put wings on the back and leave them those very useful limbs in front, which are the hands, arms, that allow you to manipulate goods. However, these come from dinosaurs, and those dinosaurs had front limbs, but they essentially co-opted the bones and the skeleton in the front limb to become wings. So as they gained flight, they lost their front limbs. And they have a challenge, a major operational challenge in manipulating things. Now, birds are actually become very good at manipulating things with their beaks. In addition to having to feed with their beaks, they have to manipulate things with their beaks. And one product of that are nests. If you think about what nests are, they are a weaving project. It's kind of bird art, but it's done by animals that don't have front arms. And so essentially, try weaving a basket with just your mouth and you can use your feet also if you want. And that's essentially, potentially something that limits the capacity of these birds to produce nests. And if you see a fantastic nest like a weaver nest or a pendula nest, it's an amazing thing to ponder. Now, my research focuses on another trade-off that once again concerns the beak. The beak for birds is primarily something for feeding, and it's also something for manipulation. But we now know, and this is something that was discovered by my graduate advisor when I was starting a PhD at Duke University, we now know that the beak is also involved in vocalizations. That when birds sing, they are using their beaks. And we can go into a pretty in-depth explanation of that, but I think the way to start is just to give you a couple of bits of information and then to show you a video of a bird singing a song. So this is a ground finch. It's a tree finch, a Darwin's tree finch. And we'll see a video clip of this bird singing this song up here. Up here is a representation of song. We call that a spectrogram. It's a representation that's essentially like a musical score. You read from left to right and up, down on the y-axis is frequency or pitch. So this is a song that has two components to it, a low frequency component and a high frequency component. And we'll play this over and over again. And what I want you to do is, when I show this first video here on the left, this will be a video clip of the bird singing at its natural rate. And just note there's a lot of stuff going on as the bird's singing. It was a little bit of a lag here to get the clip running. So in the meantime, while we're waiting for that magical hand to appear, I'll just tell you a little bit about how the bird sings. The bird has, it sings using an organ that's located inside the body here called the syrinx. And that's where the sound is produced. But the sound also travels through the body. It travels from down here all the way up through the trachea. And you see there's a lot of movement of the head. You see air sacs moving back and forth, the beak opening and closing. It's pretty serious movement, and it becomes much more dramatic for songs that are quick, that are faster. Now here's the same video that's going to be played at a slower rate.